Well, here we are, Kay Ellen, a global video interview. I'm so excited. Great to see you.
I'm glad to see you too. Speaking from London to Los Angeles, double
Absolutely,
L's.
absolutely. So the first thing I want to ask you is, do you prefer Kay Ellen versus Kay?
I do prefer KLN because I'm originally living in London from Kansas, from Wichita. And in Kansas, as many of the Midwestern states, we give our girls double names. But unlike residents of other states, we use them forever. My mother was Mary Alice, her best friend was Myrtle Alice, and my sister is Carol Ann.
Nice.
It's only when my parents were very mad at me that they called me Kay.
No, so they went the opposite. Usually when parents are mad, they say the middle name.
Exactly.
Nice. Well, my middle name is Jan, which I may say as a boy, I wasn't so sure I liked that middle name at that time, but it actually could be, and I'm from Montreal, Marc Jean, or in
Exactly.
Sweden it could be Marc Jan or whatever. So, but I'm not sure. I don't remember what my parents did call me when they were mad, but they did call me. I know that. So, and I had to come. So, with that clarification, it's great to have you. Could you just tell our audience, again, who you are, what you do, etc.?
Well, as I said, I'm Kate Ellen Consolver, and I come from the natural resources industry. I do three things really. I work as an independent director now, having come from Mobil Corporation, now ExxonMobil, as an independent director in the natural resources industry, oil and gas and mining. From a charitable side, I focus on theater, not for profit theaters, uh, both in London and in New York, and particularly those that have outreach programs to their communities, plus having excellent productions also. And also in the area of women's leadership, in order to encourage and inspire women to participate.
That's fantastic. So if we're doing this leadership series, which a number of themes. I know it's a long potential answer, but what's your perspective or definition of leadership?
My definition of leadership is actually based on what I would say is my perspective from the roles that I've held over my professional career in both the global corporate and charitable worlds, and that it's formed from being both a team member with a leader, as well as been the leader of teams. And I would, in my opinion, the most effective leaders wear leadership lightly. They have clear goals, but those are developed and or importantly validated by what I call listening, looking, and understanding. And then the implementation of these goals are often, I think, should be achieved by influencing skills and connecting collegially with others to achieve those goals. This isn't always possible, depending upon the cultures in which one is working, but when it does work, it achieves the best. It achieves the best results. I've always liked a quote I have from Rosabeth Cantor, who's a business professor at Harvard, and particularly talking about connectors, because I think this works across with leaders as well as achieving the leadership goals, is that connectors actively seek relationships and then serve as bridges between and among groups. And I think if you can do that effectively, uh, you can be an excellent leader.
Yeah, I love that. Because I've noticed leaders do they do connect and they do develop relationships. They're not transactional, et cetera, et cetera. That's a great quote. Since we're on quotes, one of my favorite quotes in the whole world is Maya Angelou. She had a quote about she said, "Most people won't remember what you say. A lot of them won't remember what you did, but they'll definitely remember how you made them feel,"
Absolutely.
which I think a leader does well too. So, with respect to that, you've had a lot of experience on boards of directors and dealing with boards. How do you determine what the right leadership is on a board?
I think and I think it's very important. You do that again, but I think sort of like looking and listening and understanding. And you look, and I think it's very important before one joins a board to look to the chairman and the CEO and the best that one can to assess their leadership style, but to validate that and only look at that only not only internally, but also to do research through research discussions through one's own network, keying into people who know them and how they perform. And when you're talking with the other members of the board, or the top level executives, to pull out, do they listen? Do they exchange ideas? Is there room for dialogue? Is there transparency in what they want to accomplish? Or are we talking about working in silos and in fact where exchange is stifled? Interesting example of that. I was interviewing for, I'm very interested in the emerging nations, third world, whatever
Mm-hmm.
we want to call it,
Right.
designate this, but commercially. And I was interviewing recently for a board position with actually with a major African company working here in London. And the chairman, who was from that country, kept stressing how important it was to fit into the culture because this was new for them. They were reaching out to people that hadn't been with them since the founding. And what it turned out that the culture of the company was silos. And though the executive search brief said that they would meet in London, they would meet in their board meetings in the city of the United States and in the country in Africa, the fact was, which I determined, that not one of the other board members had ever been to the country where the assets were because the chairman didn't want them to come and said, oh, it's in your best interest not to. And a board who, over the last 10 years, would do that is not a board that's going to engage in, shall we say, dialogue, examination of of the business, no matter how well it is doing now. It That to me was not the example of the kind of leadership team that I would want to work with.
That's actually amazing because even in board and executive searches, the top candidates will always ask us, "Have you met management and seen the business?" If you will, because how do you can you have any credibility telling them about the opportunity if you haven't? So how do you have any credibility making decisions on the business if you haven't?
Exactly. And because I was just sitting around the boardroom, is that just a video or is it real?
Exactly. I got a great bridge in Brooklyn I want to sell you type of deal, or some great land somewhere. That's
Yeah, no, but it was not there would have been the potential for great conflicts with no potential for good, I thought.
yeah, that's a fantastic story. I'm going to kind of skip a little question here to because you kind of led me in that direction. So if you're on a board or you're a leader of an organization, again, it's a long answer, but briefly, how do you develop in your mind a winning culture?
Well, I think that one, you've got to at least have a good base to start with, unless you've been brought in to turn around the culture.
Right.
But I think it does go to mm, what I would call not just being in the boardroom, but making additional effort to, and hopefully, the chairman or the what we call here the senior independent director is helping make this happen too, but to advocate for time to spend time with the top executives,
Mm-hmm.
to see the assets, to talk about their strategies, but I think outside the boardroom, so that when you come to the boardroom, there's more of an understanding of who each of you are, what your points of views are. Do a lot of talk, I think, off record. Well, outside of the formal meetings.
In other words, you're prepared to have a so that you can have a very effective formal meeting.
Exactly.
Yeah, we noticed there's different levels of preparation that certain board members have.
exactly, ranging from zero to.
Exactly.
But again,
This
that
is
goes to the leadership of, I think, also of the chair, and what board members insist on, because often there are problems with getting the documents on time, being able to get
right.
through them, meet the agenda, and I think that the board as a whole has to set standards and goals for that.
That makes sense. That makes total sense. You know, I've had influences in my life. Everybody usually has, good and bad. Hopefully, mostly good. Has there been, one person or two that stand out for you that have influenced your career and your life?
I think that's a wonderful question because it really makes you step back because there's so many people that come across through one's life. You take, bits and pieces from all. Sometimes even those who are the worst are sometimes the
Right.
best. But there are three in my life. It's sort of a trio. One perhaps is not so surprising, which is my father,
Right.
because he had such an interesting story. They were so poor. He grew up on a farm, or just a little tiny boy, in a farm in Missouri. All went bankrupt, and he and the family went, and this is true, by covered wagon when there were trains and cars
Wow.
from Missouri to Texas. They put him out of the home. I mean, gone to a bakery when he was 11 years old, and I never saw him again until he was an adult. He took himself from there, eventually rode the rails, went back to Missouri, hooked up with the superintendent of schools, went to high school, put himself through the University of Missouri, became an accountant, which ties in later,
Yeah.
and then went back ultimately to Wichita, where the remnants of the family had ended up, and started a business, an amusement park business for children, interestingly enough, and a golf range, to bring his brothers back together to recreate the family. And because an influencer, one definition of an influencer is someone who you're influenced by people who believe in you.
Hmm.
And he was one of those men. He put me to work in his business when I was 11.
Smart guy.
And so side by side. I can make a great cotton candy and a snow cone, I want to tell
I
you.
can't wait.
But so that. And then when I was at Mobile Corporation, I guess what one today calls a sponsor, was a man who became the chairman of the company when I was there. Well, he left when I was there too, but called Alan Murray.
Hmm.
And this man, it was the same thing. He recognized the value, what I could contribute, in part because he had a very strong independent mother who effectively brought him up herself in Queens, boy, off in Queens, New York. And he got his start in the oil business when he worked as a mailroom clerk in the New York office of Gulf Oil. He was earning 75 cents an hour. I earned 40 cents an hour with my dad. I stayed there, except they passed him over for the training program. So he went, got a job at Mobil while he went to night school to become an accountant and worked his way through the organization to become the chairman. But I think he reached out to other people, most unusual people, because he recognized their value, something in them that people hadn't recognized in him. And he was the kind of guy that when he did something good, you always heard from him. And if you did something that wasn't quite so good, he was straightforward with you too. He was very, very interesting. He died uh, quite young on the golf course. I mean, after a great golf game, so that was good after he retired. But I miss him. And the other person, and again, very value. Interestingly enough, which I think is hard in that business, he was very value driven. And the third person is my husband, who allows me, to pursue and support, my own dreams and shares my common values. So a triumvirate.
That's awesome. No wonder you turned out the way you turned out. Pretty good influencers. um, Young people, we have this discussion a lot with executives and board members about the diversity on boards. And diversity doesn't only mean like black, white, women type of thing. When do you think young people, young up and coming leaders, should start thinking about board positions?
I think now, then, particularly if I'm looking, at IT, and there is a big movement to bring people who, like we were, laughing earlier, will understand IT onto even very big boards because they understand. But even before coming onto boards, I think it's a way to contribute one's learning and expertise at whatever stage. And I do think that it's a very interesting conversation and dialogue. How young can someone be to come on a board? And I
Right.
don't think age should be a restriction because it has to do, with the the knowledge and learning they can contribute. But that's to say it's a more standard course, and someone's looking either at building their own business, which is where a lot of younger people are going today, particularly women, or perhaps you're in a more traditional environment. But I think it should be thought about now. And one of the movements that I see here, particularly in encouraging women how to think of this, is to look at certainly need at least initially charitable boards, something that one's passionate about.
Right.
It could be science, it could be health, it could be education. With me, it's theater for reasons other than just, getting to see great productions. But that's a way to start and to become engaged in learning what it means to contribute that expertise, to learn about the business, to make strategic decisions.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's great. That's great advice for people. If First of all, I meant to ask you. You speak English very well. Do you speak any other languages?
And speak some French, and that goes back to my mother, Mary Alice.
Uh huh.
She grew up very poor in Kansas City, but in her day, they taught languages in the grade schools in Kansas City. And she always wanted to be a French teacher. And she studied French all the way through high school when she realized that she was so poor, she was going to be lucky to get, which she did go to the State Teachers College, which she was never getting to France. And so she became an English teacher. But she would tell us as we grew up, and so my brother and sister and I all took French. We studied in France. That her eighth grade project, of which she was so proud, she carved the Arc de Triomphe out of a bar of ivory soap. When she was in her 70s, about 5 years before she died, I took her to France. She had never been to France. We traveled all over, but we were in Paris and we were standing in the Champs Elysees. She was looking at the Arc de Triomphe. And with no reference, she simply looked at me and said, I missed a few details.
You still have that soap by any chance?
I really wish I did. But if I languages, again, I multiple languages, and I would study Russian, Chinese, and Spanish.
Well, in these days, aside from it, I speak French and some Spanish. Aside from, I think it's just good education and helps you determine where things are derived from. Obviously, in this global world, which is a redundant statement, it's valuable, super valuable.
Absolutely.
So, a few more questions, because watching the time here. Do you have a most admired leader? Someone that, that infamous question, if you could have dinner with whomever, who would it be?
Well, again, it's like who's influenced you in your life. I look at a variety of people for inspiration
Hmm.
rather than, one leader. And fortunately, the ones that really spring to mind, I would have to have dinner with them over a seance because they died. But one of them, because they are people who live their values, even though their personal lives or situations could be very messy, were true to those and made a difference. One of those is Eleanor Roosevelt.
Hmm.
And you actually mentioned the Maya Angelou, which I thought was very inspirational. And it was just announced in the New York Times. Nadine Gordimer just died,
Oh,
and
right.
and I find their lives and others like them inspirational. And I draw on that for, I don't know, a type of, I think, strength.
No, I totally understand that. Last question before a couple of quick personal questions. Is there one accomplishment, personal or business, you're most proud of?
I I think it's the ability now to the time ability to give back in areas that have surprised me, such as the theater. One of the things I did when I came, we moved to London in 2002, and I, through friends who knew I loved the theater, became involved with a young American director who was working here, 24 at that time. And he had a production of Wojciech, which is the George Bruckner classic, which is turned into an opera by Berg that I think everybody probably loves to hate, about the young, poor, sort of common soldier who sacrifices everything for the love of his life, included, and ultimately she betrays him. He's crazy. He goes crazy. But to me, to be able to help this young man bring this play to New York, we produced it at St. Anne's Warehouse, to have it, because it was a sort of a linchpin for his, his career. And for me, the story was fascinating because it's really about the failure of leadership, quite honestly, about how this young soldier is misused and abused, all in the name of the power of the military, and what happened to him and his family and his wife. Anyway, this young director did it very innovatively, using the music of Dolly Parton and Elvis Presley.
Wow.
So it spoke differently, and I loved that ability to take the business skills that I had learned to help somebody artistically launch their career.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Here's the final one-word answers, if that's even possible. Favorite sport?
Probably golf. I had an uncle named Tex who taught me who taught me how to swing a golf club. I have a great swing, but I still can't get down.
Favorite movie or TV show?
Actually, I'm a theater person.
Uh,
And
favorite show?
and
Broadway?
favorite. Oh, there's just so many. I think something we did at St. Anne's Warehouse in New York, where I sit on the board. We brought Black Watch over for the National Theatre of Scotland, which was about the Iraq War, or Wojciech, which is a play that I produced there, or
Awesome.
Julius Caesar from the Donmar, or Red Velvet from the Tricycle, the theater here in London that we just brought.
I told you it wouldn't be one-word answers.
I know.
Do you have a
And
favorite? Do you have,
I'm tone deaf, but I love food. I went to professional culinary school at one point.
oh, well, favorite food then?
Probably relate most to French food.
Let's see, and favorite music?
Country western.
All right. By the way, on a last note, and I
George
thank you.
Strait.
I don't know if you've seen that movie Chef yet.
Not yet.
Spectacular.
Yeah, exactly.
Really good. Hey, I really appreciate your time. It's been delightful,
It's
and
been
I look forward to talking to you again soon.
absolutely. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it tremendously.
Thanks, my pleasure.